asked me to repeat that so that it goes into the record, and he was making a comment that it might be useful to make amendments as we go along, including an amendment related to removal of the council for not following the Constitution. So let's take a quick break here though, and we started a little late and we all got things to do every evening. We'll try to finish up by about 8:15 or 8:20. Viewers got together. We'll try not to take up too much of everybody's time every night. And we've been running on Indian time and eating for a half hour, and so we'll go for a little while longer and then we'll call it a night. We're talking about the powers of the council. And you know, just generally speaking, what's the one thing that every government does to raise money to fund its government? Taxes. Federal taxes, state taxes. It's the one thing everybody does. It's the principal source of revenue. We, the tribe, today have some taxes, but still a lot of our money from our leases and whatnot, that doesn't go to like general distribution. It goes to run the government. We've used all of our income to run the government because we haven't been into that thing called taxes. So Article 6, Section 1H says the council has the power to regulate and license all business and professional activities conducted on the reservation. And once again, subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior, and to levy assessments for public purposes, provided that any assessment upon non-members trading or residing within the jurisdiction of the tribe shall be subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. In other words, the tribe has the right to tax. Now, what do you think that everybody would do if the tribe start taxing its own members? What do you think the reaction would be? My own sense is not very good, huh? But what's one tax that a lot of other people pay, white people on the reservation pay, that we don't pay?
Property.
Property tax.
Property and a state income tax, right? White people on the reservation that work at the school, they pay federal income tax and they pay state income tax. We don't. So what do you think would happen if one day the council said, well, we think we're going to have a tribal income tax, and you guys are going to start paying the tribe and we're going to levy a tax on you? See, my own opinion is that simply because the tribe hasn't been very responsible with its money, most people would go, what? You're not going to take my money. What are you going to do with it? You're just going to waste it. And there would be a rebellion over that. Same thing if the tribe said, all right, well, we're going to tax your property. And people's reaction would be the same thing, wouldn't it? And so that goes back to why we have to have accountability. If the tribe were being accountable and doing the right thing all the time, there's always a natural resistance to tax. That's how the United States was formed, right? The United States government was formed on that heading of taxation without representation, because the British were taxing the colonies and they rebelled because they didn't want that. And so there's a general resistance to taxes. So if the tribe started doing that to its own people, my sense is we would resist, and that would become an issue. But that's why, to me, then we have to have accountability, checks and balances, and ultimately separation of powers. Now it says there that we got the right to levy assessments upon non-members, subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. However, as I told you in the very first session, the United States Supreme Court has significantly limited the tribe's sovereignty in that respect. And they have basically said, no, you don't, even if the government says you can, you can't, because we say as a matter of tribal jurisdiction, you lost the right to tax non-Indians on non-Indian fee land with within the reservation. And so remember a few years back, the tribe passed something called a possessory interest tax. And it was trying to tax like the Burlington Northern right-of-way, the Glacier Electric right-of-way, those kinds of things. And they all challenged, that was a fad across Indian country. And those were all challenged in the federal courts. And the federal courts struck down every one of those taxes. And so today we have a limited right. We have a hotel tax, a bed tax that the big hotel pays and some of the others pay, but some don't. And if they really all challenged us, we might not be able to make it stick. We have tax sharing agreements with the state where we get a share of the gasoline tax, the liquor tax, and the cigarette tax that's collected on the reservation. But that's tied to tribal membership. And we don't get the tax that's levied on the white people in theory. And so the tribes, even though it says that, over the years, because of the court cases, our ability to do that, and therefore our ability to raise revenue, has been severely restricted. But let's talk about that just for a second longer. Let's say the tribe's possessory interest tax was still in effect, but the tribe wasn't taxing none of us. Wouldn't the non-Indians then have an argument that we're being treated unequally? That thing called equal protection? You're taxing us, but not your own people. Well, why don't you do that to your own people too, and we won't feel so bad about it. But the bottom line is we can't do it under the law. So let's go on. The tribe has the right to exclude from land owned by members, by the tribe or its members, persons not legally entitled to reside thereon, under ordinances subject to review by the Secretary of Interior. That's that famous word. You ever heard that word, float? Let's float Joe off the reservation. He's not a good guy. Let's get rid of him. That's where that comes from. The right to exclude people from the reservation. The next one is that the council has the power to requisition community labor for public purposes of the tribe, purchase land from members of the tribe under condemnation proceedings in courts of competent jurisdiction, subject to review by the Secretary of Interior. In other words, the council could in theory pass a law tomorrow saying, we don't like what them constitutional review people are doing, we think we'll punish them. We're going to requisition their labor. We're going to force them all to go up there and rebuild the Indian Days campground. That's what it says. It says they can requisition community labor. In other words, they can force labor upon us if it's supposedly for community purposes. And that the tribe has the power to condemn land of its members in courts of competent jurisdiction. In other words, just like the state and the federal government, when they're going to expand the highway, at the end of the day, you don't have a right to stop them. Your only right is to bargain with them for more money, because they can condemn your land and you can't stop that. And so remember, there was a case, some of you might have been approached by Pat Shelf to sign up for it, where the Conoco pipeline was running across the reservation and they tried to stop it. And those people went to court, federal court, and they had that pipeline condemned under a federal statute. And so people were basically forced to allow the pipeline to cross and get whatever money the court ordered that they were entitled to get. That's what condemnation means. That the tribe could, in theory, say, well, George, geez, you got a nice piece of land out there. We'd like to have that land and build, I don't know, a new church on it. We're going to condemn your land and take it from you because we see that as a community purpose. And they could do that, according to this article right here. 1K, that the council has the power to promulgate ordinances for the purposes of safeguarding peace and safety of the residents of the tribe, establish minor courts for adjudication of claims or disputes arising amongst members of the tribe, and for trial and punishment of members of the tribe charged with commission of offenses set forth in those ordinances. In other words, we have the right to law and order and to enforce those laws in tribal court. Once again, it doesn't go on to say, and those courts shall not be subject to interference or review or whatever by the tribe, or the tribal council does it. That's why we don't have separation of judicial power. That's the judicial power of the tribe, right there. And we don't say that the council can't interfere in it. There's another important thing about that doesn't relate to our separation of power, but really about our sovereignty. And as a lawyer, I've had that brought up to me numerous times in cases where we're trying to say the tribe's got the authority to hear this case involving these non-Indians in tribal court. And some lawyer will come in and say, wait now, you don't. According to your Constitution, that article says that you only have the right to establish minor courts for the adjudication of claims or disputes arising amongst members of the tribe. You don't, by your own language, you don't have jurisdiction over us. We're not members of the tribe. So in a case that I had in front of the Court of Appeals many years ago involving the old East Glacier Water and Sewer District, the Court of Appeals at that time said, well, wait now. There's two ways to interpret a constitution. One is according to this, the strict language of the Constitution. Another acceptable way is according to the way that the adopters of that Constitution understood it. And in that case, the court said, the Blackfeet didn't really write all of that. That was more or less given to them. And the people that adopted it didn't understand all those written words. So we're going to interpret it the way they believed it, not the way it was written. And the court said, we believe that they would have said, no, that means if that involves a member of the tribe, then we get to have jurisdiction. So if it's just two non-members, the tribal court itself has said, no, we don't have jurisdiction in that instance. There was a fight between Archambault and the Weeder family over the sale of the old Archambault place out here. The contract for deed, they got into a fight over it. Now, although Chuck lived here for many years, he's not a Blackfeet. He's from Fort Belknap. And so, but they tried to bring that fight to tribal court. And the Weeder family, they opposed it. Said, no, none of us are members. You don't got jurisdiction. And the tribal court said, you're right, we agree. Because there's no member involved, and no member interest, no tribal interest, you go someplace else. You either go to Fort Belknap or you go to state court, but you're not going to fight it out here. So that's a provision that really restricts tribal sovereignty. And another reason why those of us that want to do this need to change things like that, to have the tribe have the broadest expansion of jurisdiction that the law allows us today. Because bright white lawyers have come in and said, no, according to that, you got no authority over us. So the next one, Article 6, Section 1I, or 1L rather, says we have the right to